What is frame data? And what is the frame meter? What are all these colors here? What am I supposed to do with all this information? Well, by the end of the video, you will have a firm understanding of what frame data is so that you can make better decisions and win more games. First, let's turn on the frame meter. So hit start, and we're going to scroll over to screen display settings, and we're going to turn on the frame meter. We're going to see two rows of boxes, each of them representing a frame. The top row will be ours, and the bottom will be our opponent. To understand what these funny colors mean, we must first understand a few key points. So I'm going to play a clip from an unreleased video I did on frame data. I recently made a video about frame data. It is the logic and reason behind everything in fighting games. As of the time of this recording, modern fighting games run at 60 frames a second. Frames are the measurement of speed referring to a normal or a command. Every second that passes, 60 frames also pass, broken down into 3 stages: startup, active, and recovery. Let's first look at stage 2, the active phase. Active frames refer to the frames in which your move can hit an opponent. We start at step 2 because when we think about a move, we think about hitting the move, and the only part of the move that hits the opponent is the active phase, and the active phase is represented on the frame meter by the purple bars. Let's look at Go Osatsu. When I use this move, she has to spin around first, and then she connects with the opponent. During these 17 frames of startup, Juri cannot attack Ryu. It is only after the 17 frames during the purple phase where she can actually connect with Ryu. Let's now double back and talk about the first stage, startup. Startup refers to the amount of frames that must pass before your move becomes active. The recovery phase refers to the amount of frames your move must complete before you are able to act again. To put it simply, startup refers to the windup of the move, active refers to hitting the opponent, and recovery refers to her reeling her arm back before she can do her next attack. Juri cannot act again until she is out of recovery or when those blue bars pass. When we collided with Ryu, we saw another bar. The bottom bar is Ryu's bar, and the yellow bars refer to stun. When we hit Ryu, we see startup, active, and stun starts on the first frame of active. Ryu was stunned longer from the hit than Juri had to recover. The difference between the amount of hit stun versus the amount of recovery is called advantage. Since Juri recovers 7 frames before Ryu gets out of hit stun, Juri is +7 on advantage, or you might have heard +7 on hit. Since I'm 7 frames ahead, if I throw out a move after the medium punch, that's 5 frames. If we look at the frame meter, the first move recovers, the next move starts up, becomes active, and then recovers. And if we look at the bottom meter, Ryu was in stun the whole time. He never had a chance to recover. This is called a combo. More specifically, this is called a link. A link is when you use a move that leaves you at advantage and your next move starts up so fast, your enemy never leaves hit stun. Your first move must completely recover before you use the second move. But the key part is the enemy must never leave hit stun. If our second move becomes active after Ryu has left hit stun, if we look at the frame meter, Ryu had time to recover and he's able to block. This is not a link. So how can we tell what links and doesn't link? The frame meter will tell us startup frames, and it also will tell us advantage. If we hit Ryu, it tells us stand medium punch starts up in 6 frames, and on hit, it leaves us advantage by 7 frames. If we use a move, it tells us startup frames for all of her moves, even on whiff. Since we're advantaged by 7 frames, any move that starts up in 7 frames or quicker will link. Crouching medium punch is 6 frames. So 7 frames advantage, 6 frames startup, that links. Stand light kick is 5 frames. So 7 frames, 5 frames, that links. Startup, active, recovery, startup, active, recovery, and on the bottom, Ryu is in hit stun the whole time. What if Ryu is blocking? If we hit start, go to dummy settings, we can turn block all on. Now when we use that same move, we get a different piece of information. It says we're advantage 2 frames rather than being 7. That's because the amount of frames you get on block is different from the amount of frames that you get on hit. So after I use stand medium punch, if Ryu blocks, I am only ahead of him by 2 frames. What does it mean to be advantage 2 frames on block? It typically is referred to as +2 on block. So if you ever hear that, that means you're 2 advantage on block, +2. I can act 2 frames before Ryu. And if we look at the frame meter, we see it here. He recovers out of block stun, and there's 2 empty frames, and then he enters block stun again. Well, what would happen if Ryu hit a button? We can go into the dummy settings, go over to reversal settings, and on block reversal, we can set it to be crouching light punch. We'll turn that on. When I hit him, he will respond with a crouching light punch. The frame meter shows my move start up was active for 5 frames and recovered for 12 frames. Meanwhile, Ryu was in block stun for 19 frames, and then he was able to start up. His move became active, and then he recovered. Let's look at a situation where Juri would take advantage of her 2-frame advantage. If we were to hit medium punch and then light kick, you see here on the frame meter, startup, active, recovery, and her next move, startup, active, and recovery. On Ryu's bar, he was in block stun this whole time, tried to start up, but then my move became active, and then he was stuck in hit stun. The logic is in the frame meter. Ryu was stuck in block stun this whole time, tried to hit a button afterwards, and then my move became active and stuffed his. This results in a counter hit setup, or it's commonly called a frame trap. A frame trap is a sequence of moves that leaves a small gap, too small for the opponent's move to become active. Meanwhile, my move can become active before his, and I win out. Did we need to have the frame meter on to find this out? No, technically we could just press buttons and see what works, but why go through this trouble? Turn the frame meter on, we can make a better plan. Ryu's quickest button is 4 frames, and we can see that on the frame meter. On here, it says his startup was 4 frames. So if we're +2 on this situation, as long as my move becomes active here, my next move will beat out his startup of his next move. We can see that in action like this. Startup, active, recovery. Ryu is in block stun. My move starts up in 1, 2, 3, 4. 5th frame becomes active, while his move is still trying to start up. His move would have become active on this frame here. It didn't have a chance to because my move was already active. What happens if 2 moves become active on the same exact frame? Well, that results in a trade. Both of our moves entered the active phase and we both got hit at the same time. So we both entered stun at the same time. Why did Ryu recover after I recovered if we both hit each other at the same time? Ryu used a light attack. I used a medium attack. Usually, mediums give more hit stun than light attacks. This could also lend itself to interesting situations called trade combos. Based on what we learned, since I recovered before Ryu and I'm advantage 8 frames, any move that is 8 frames or quicker should be able to combo, even though we traded. Let's look at another unique situation. If I use standing light punch, I'm disadvantaged 2 frames. So if I hit light punch and then hit light punch again, I get beat out because I'm disadvantaged 2 frames and Ryu gets to act first. Ryu recovers before I do, and he recovers 2 frames before me. His move starts up even before I recover from my first move. His light punch becomes active before my light punch becomes active. So, what happens here? Wait, doesn't that disprove what I just said? Let's look at these situations side by side. The situation on the left shows startup, active, recovery, startup, and then I got beat, trying to become active. The situation on the left shows something different. Startup, active, recovery, but no startup. I go straight to the active phase. Some moves can be chainable, which means there's no startup on the second move. It goes from recovery straight to active for the second move. Ryu has to recover and tries to go startup, but gets hit and goes into recovery. Juri's feng shui engine works in reverse. Instead of cutting the startup, it cuts the recovery of all of our string. We have here startup active, startup active, startup active. So if any of Juri's feng shui strings leave a big enough gap that Ryu tries to mash through, as we see here, that means he will get hit because my moves will definitely become active before his. After my crouching medium kick, Ryu tries to hit a button, only gets 1 frame to do so, which is not quick enough, and then my move becomes active the next frame. Some moves can be canceled by special moves. If you look here, we have the startup of light punch. It becomes active for 1 frame, but then we have the startup of her Fuhajin. That's because standing light punch is special cancelable. We see 1 empty frame here. So if Ryu tries to hit a button, Ryu gets hit. There's not enough space in between those 2 moves. Let's review. Every move has startup, active, and recovery for all their moves. Some moves can be canceled into each other, which is called a chain. Also, some moves can be canceled into a special move. That's called a special cancel. A frame trap is when you throw out a move that's advantage and your next move becomes active before their move becomes active. It's a trap because they think they can squeeze a move in and they cannot. Let's look at some cases where we can manipulate the frame data to get even more advantage. The first is going to be Drive Rush. Drive Rush is done by holding down the parry and dashing. If we don't use Drive Rush, we're advantage 2 frame. But if we Drive Rush into the same button, we're advantage 6 frame. Let's first look at the frame meter. This purple color shows something new. This is armor, which we get off of the parry. When we hold parry, we get armor. The same thing as if we use Drive Impact. There's a certain amount of frames that we get that is armored. Standing medium punch starts up in 6 frames. However, if we Drive Rush, we see the startup of the move is now 17 frames. That's because we have to run first before the move starts. Any move that you Drive Rush into, you get 4 extra frames on hit or block. So this move that is usually +2 on block is now +6. When we use crouching medium punch after standing medium punch, we traded because both of our moves became active on the same frame. However, if we were to Drive Rush, now Ryu can't hit a button at all because there's no longer a gap in between those 2 buttons. If we were to manually leave enough space in between those 2 moves, we would see that it would counter hit. And if we look at the frame meter, we have just a frame there, enough so that Ryu's move doesn't even start up. Sequences that were not advantaged, so Ryu can counterattack before our move becomes active, can now get +4 frames, and we can act before Ryu does. This could be tricky for the opponent because if they're used to counteracting after a certain move, after drive rush, they might fool themselves and get hit by it. Or if they don't think they can act after a drive rush, they might be susceptible to throws. Drive rush can also augment things on hit. Standing medium punch is +7. After drive rush, it is now +11. Any move that's 11 frames or quicker will now combo. A really damaging combo for Juri is standing medium punch, standing heavy punch, but that does not combo. Standing medium punch starts up and becomes active. After it hits Ryu, Ryu enters hit stun. Juri recovers and exits recovery, starting up her next move. Now, that move becomes active, however, becomes active after Ryu's hit stun wears off. Drive rush will put Ryu in an extra 4 frames of hit stun, so that would have comboed. And if we look at the frame meter, my move becomes active, it recovers, my next move starts up, becomes active, and all the while Ryu is in hit stun. With drive rush, adding those 4 extra frames on a drive rush normal, you can create new combos that wouldn't have been possible and get more damage. Now that we understand how the frame meter works, we can create situations without having to test for hours. Standing light punch is 5 frames advantage on hit. If we were to drive rush, we know that we can add 4 frames to it, so we would be 9 frames advantage. Any move that is 9 frames or quicker would combo. We could just look at the startup here and press buttons. 4 frames, 5 frames, 6 frames, 6 frames, 10 frames, 8 frames. Oh, so if this is 8 frames and after a drive rush, I'm +9 advantage, well, that means standing light punch on a drive rush with a crouching heavy punch would work. Standing heavy kick is advantaged by 2 frames on hit. So if we drive rush, we add 4, that gives us 6. So any move that is 6 frames or quicker will combo after a drive rush standing heavy kick. Since this move is 6 frames or quicker, we can piece together this combo here. Let's look at projectiles. We have the startup phase here, but we also have this orange bar. Think of this projectile phase as the active and recovery both together. Since the projectile becomes active, and it's active all the way through, and it's still active even after this phase, I can't move until I reach this 30 frame mark. If we look at this situation on hit, we can see the story play out. So we have startup for 16 frames, 1 frame of the projectile phase, and then 29 frames of recovery. We must go through these 30 frames, no matter what. But what if I'm far away? We have the projectile phase go through for 27 frames, and then 3 frames of recovery. 30 frames must pass for this projectile. But something interesting happens. I only recovered for 3 frames. If we look at this situation up close, Ryu must recover out of hit stun for 31 frames. And 30 frames must pass by for me to act again, which means I am 1 frame of advantage. If I let the fireball travel just a bit, we see something interesting happen. The projectile travels for 19 frames, and on the 19th frame is when Ryu starts his 31 frames of hit stun. Meanwhile, I only have 11 more frames to recover before I can act again. That means Ryu enters his hit stun much later, and I recover much sooner, which gives me advantage 19 frames. 30 frames must pass before I act again. So if I can recover and my projectile travels, I can have Ryu start his hit stun much later. If I hit the fireball the closest that I can, I have to recover for 30 frames. Ryu has to recover for 31 frames, putting me at 1 frame of advantage. But if I can make that fireball travel just a bit, we see all of a sudden, I'm 6 frames of advantage. I hit Ryu with a crouching medium punch and special cancel that to my fireball. The 15 frames go by, and then the projectile traveled for 6 frames. This is the frame where Ryu would start his 31 frames of hit stun. It's hard to tell because he's in hit stun throughout the whole combo, but this is the frame that he starts his hit stun on. 31 frames after, I am 6 frames of advantage. So, in theory, I can combo after the fireball. Because I am +6, any move that is 6 frames or quicker will work. This is a sneaky way to augment frame data because you can allow your fireball to travel and give you bigger frame advantage. In this case here, I am minus and I cannot attack before Ryu attack. However, if I let my fireball travel just a bit, I can attack before Ryu. And in some cases, leave really nasty traps where Ryu thinks he's free to attack and he's actually not. This was a hard task. I wanted to explain a really hard concept in a precise and concise way so that even beginners can understand it. If there's anything you don't understand, please ask in the comments. And if this helped out in any way, please press a like button so I know that you like content like this. And I hope I did a good job because I want you to enjoy Street Fighter 6 because sometimes pain points can be relieved by having more information. If you want to get better at Street Fighter 6, subscribe to the channel, and on screen will be a video that should help you on your journey. Now that you understand frame data and the frame meter, I'm sure you'll be able to understand this video a lot better. Hopefully you enjoy. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.